Now today we're going to be looking again at the hand penned petals, and we're going to make this card here using some blends. So rather than using the stamps that come within the stamp set to colour it, we're going to be using some blends to colour. So let's get started, and I'll share the products that you'll require for this card. So let me pop that to one side. So what we need is a piece of basic white. So really all our cardstock is basic white and a piece of basic black as well. So we've got a piece of basic white, which is half a piece of A4 cardstock, which is 29.9 centimeters by 10.5 centimeters, and I've scored that at 14.9. I've also got another piece of basic white cardstock, which I've already run through my embossing folder, and I am using the Tasteful Textile 3D embossing folder there. And this piece here measures 10 centimeters by 14.4, so that's going to make our mat. Then we have a piece for our card front. Now this piece is 14.1 centimeters in depth and 7.5 centimeters wide. And this is the piece we're going to stamp on and colour. And then we have a piece of basic black cardstock to do our sentiment on. And we might even change our sentiment up a little bit to the one I used on my other card. So let's start stamping, because that's what we're all about, is stamping. So this is a fairly simple card to stamp. We're only using one colour ink to stamp, and that's our Memento Black. Now I do like using my Memento, and the reason why we're using Memento today is we're going to be using our blends. Now with our blends here, I'm keeping my colours fairly low. I usually use quite a few more colours than what I've got here. So what I've chosen, the colours I've chosen that we're going to use today is our Flirty Flamingo. So I've got both the dark and the light in the Flirty Flamingo. I've got the Highland Heather and the dark and the light in the Highland Heather. We're going to use the So Saffron, again the dark and the light in the So Saffron. And for my green, I'm using Mint Macaron, and I've got the dark and light for that. And we're also going to be using our colour lifter pen, just to make sure that we've got a lot of white. I wanted to keep a lot of white in our design. I didn't want the colours going all the way to the edge. I wanted to keep it very light and soft in colour. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that by using the colour lifter. So I'll pop the card just there on the edge there so we can see that. So there are all the blends we're going to be using. Now your blends, you purchase those as two pens together. And there's a lot of new colours coming out with the new ink colours as well. So I can't wait to get those. I haven't ordered them as yet. But I thought these colours all looked good together. So that's what we're going to be using. And getting back to the Memento, because we're using blends, and blends are an alcohol ink, we have to use an opposite ink. So the Memento is a water-based ink. So we're going to be using a water-based ink with the Mementos, because if we used an alcohol-based ink, such as StazOn, as soon as we put the blends to it, it will actually blend with the blends because they're both alcohol. Alcohol actually makes your ink run and move. So we don't want that to happen. We want a stable ink while we're working. So we're going to be using a water-based ink, which is my favorite ink, Memento Tuxedo Black. So we're going to start by stamping this. Now, if you have a look at my original card, when I did this last night, I stamped the one in the middle, the floral design first in the middle, and then stamped top and bottom. But as you can see, I've got a Highland Heather flower here and a Highland Heather flower there, but I don't have another one up here. So I found it it's very, well, I feel it's a little bit unbalanced because I need a little bit of more of that colour up here, because we want to sort of work in threes to keep things as balanced as we possibly can. So with this stamp up here, I've got to turn it around so I can get this smaller flower in. So that's a difference that we're going to do today. So you really have to think a little bit rather than just stamping. Excuse me. And by starting in the middle and then working out on either side, we've got a central point, and it also makes it a lot easier when stamping, and our spacing and everything as well. So let's start with this, and we're going to ink up our stamped image. I already have that on a block. Just take the words there off, I don't need those. And I'm going to take, because it's a large image, I'm going to take my ink pad to my stamp. Now just remember, if you're new to stamping and you're purchasing any of the stamps through Stampin' Up, you do need to purchase your acrylic blocks as well. I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat today. Excuse me. So I'm just going to line this up a little bit. Now, as I said, I want to start by stamping the first one in the middle. And I've only cut this 7.5 centimeters wide, so I want to take this out as far as I possibly can. And I'm just having a look to see how I want to orientate that. And I'm going to stamp that just about there. So that's roughly in the middle. Just holding that down for a few seconds just to let that ink touch there. Okay, so I've got my first image there. So now I want to ink up for my second image. Hi Annie, how are you? If you could let us know where you're from, I'd love to know a little bit more about that. People who are watching. Okay, so I'm going to turn this a little bit because I want that purple flower to be in here, but I want it to sort of not have to work over the top. So I'm just trying to work out how best to situate my next stamped image. Now I may not get that purple flower in, that might be okay. Let's just go with that there. Okay, so I've only got the purple flower coming up once so far, so I want to try to line it up that I don't have it again. So again, otherwise I'll have exactly what I had before. I'll have two purple flowers and then none of the other. So I really want to leave maybe it out and just have that purple flower in there once. Again, working out where I want to position this. Okay, I'm not going to quite get that purple flower not in there unless I flip my stamp around. No, okay. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of planning, and I like that probably best there. And we are going to get a bit of that purple flower, but there may be a way I can work around that. Okay, so we've stamped all of that, so I'm just going to pop that block to one side. I'll clean it off at a later date. So now we have our images all stamped, and we're going to start colouring. So these big flowers are the ones that I'm doing in my pink. So let's start. And once we start colouring, now when you're using your blends, there are a few different techniques that different people like. Some people like to colour the whole area and lay a lot of colour, starting with your light and then putting your darker colour on top and then putting your light on top of that again. That is generally how I work. Some people like to lay their darker colour down first, which is your highlight colour, and then come in over the top with your lighter colour. Because we're not actually going to be colouring the whole solid image, I want to keep some light. I'm going to be doing like a flick or a tick. So if I get my pen here, I'm just going to be basically ticking like that because I want to flick. I want the colour going out to nothing at the ends. So I'm going to start with this flower here in the middle, and I'm going to work around flicking out. Now I can flick that out quite a bit, and I keep turning my paper so then my flicks are going out. Now I'm not really worrying about going right to those edges. As I said, I don't really want to go to those all the way out to those edges because I want a bit of white space, and all I'm doing is just flicking or doing it like a tick outwards. So that's in my lighter colour, and then I'm going to come in with my darker colour. Now you could use I'm using the brush end of my nib here because these pens come with a fine tip end and a brush end. So on these larger flowers, I'm just going to do, I'm using the brush, but when I'm using this darker colour, I'm not coming out as far. I'm not doing my ticks as far as what I'd done before. So, because I really only just want to highlight that center. Hello Vicky, how are you? The center of my flower. And then I'm going to come back over, going back over those dark colors again, just using that tick and just blending those colors together. Just turning my paper around, so I'm just each time just ticking out and just bringing my color out a little bit. Once you're happy with that, what you can do then is come back in with your color lifter, and we're going to do a tick again, but we're going to work from the outside in this time. So all I'm doing is just doing tiny weeny little ticks just around those edges, just to soften, to take away that harshness of that end of that tick. I just want to soften a little bit. What happens with your color lifter, it actually, because there's no color in it, it's just a clear alcohol, what it's doing is pushing the ink away. So where I'm laying it down, it's forcing the ink away from where I want it to go. So it's actually pushing that color back in. It's not removing the color, it's just pushing that color away. If you had a piece of, I've got a scrap here, I'll just show you exactly what I mean by pushing the color away. But if you colored this in, so I'm just using my darker color here and colored that in, and then if I came up with my color lifter and drew circles in that, like big dots, where I've got that big dot, I don't know whether you can see that, but it's whitening because it's pushing the color to the outside edge. So you've got like a little ring around that white area where it's pushing the color out. So if you wanted to make dots or squiggles in your color, that's how you can do it with your color lifter. It just pushes all that color out of the road. So all I'm basically doing, what I'm doing here, is going around my edges by adding some color and softening that harsh line. So it's just giving a little bit of a lighter effect. So that's all really that I'm doing there. So I'm just playing with that color and using the alcohol in the color lifter, as I said, to move the color away from the edges. So let's keep on coloring. So again, I'm going to start with my light with my brush nib, and I'm just going to go around this flower, again working in a tick, taking the color out, I'm not worrying about the center of the flower. I'm leaving the center of the flower white. Now you are best just to work on one flower at a time, because alcohol inks actually dry very, very quickly. And what you want to try to do is work on this while it's actually still wet. And that's why sometimes if you're colouring in a solid image, you're better off laying down a complete layer of your colour in your lightest shade, and then coming and adding your highlights in your darker over the top of it. Because if you add quite a few layers, and when you have a look at the back of this, the colour is trying to saturate through, and that means it's actually quite wet. So that is what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to get that wetness, and that all helps with all your blending of your colour. Now I've probably done a little bit, not enough, done too much ticking over here. So let's just work. Whoops, I want to use that brush end, I think. And we're just going to soften those edges, because I just really want all that, as much white as we possibly can in here. It does dry very quickly, but because we've laid down so much colour, it will just take a few seconds for that to just dry and soften. Just going to come back and do a bit more on this one. Okay, and we're going to go back this time to this large flower here. Just do that tick. Come back in with our lighter colour just to blend those colours out. I'm just going over the top of what I've done, and that'll just blend. And then again with my colour lifter around those edges, just doing a little small tick, coming back in just to soften those edges a bit, so the colour looks like it's blending into the white. Okay, and I'm just going to start with my lighter colour. I'll do this flower over here. You could just use your finer nib if you want to when you're working on your smaller flowers, because we don't really need that much in there. And it's just a matter of slowly just working around, just doing the same thing. You don't have to be video keeps stopping for me. Okay, it might be your internet. That's a pity, Linny. Okay then, what was I going to say? Sorry. Oh, I've lost my train of thought completely there, which is not unusual for me. So let's just keep working. So it's just, as I was saying, it's just a matter of just keep going over what you've done. You don't need to get too worried about having this perfect, because blender pens are very, very forgiving, I find. And because we're coming in with the lifter, we are able to sort of work on a few little areas if we feel like we've gone too far out or we've got it too dark. Okay, that's all our colours in the Flirty Flamingo. So the next colour I'm going to bring in is our Highland Heather, and we're going to do the same thing again on some of these smaller flowers. Now I've really here only got 2 flowers to do the Highland Heather, but because I want to add a little bit more, I might just do this flower here also in the Highland Heather, and hopefully that might just balance it out. So again, I'm starting with my light colour, and I'm just going to flick that out. Now I don't have to flick as much because these are much smaller flowers, and I'm going to use my fine tip on this one. Again, just flicking that out. And then again, I'm just going to go over the top of that. And then with my lifter, just going around some of those edges. And I'm really just doing very, very small little flicks. So I really just want that just to be blended out a bit. Again, this one with my darker colour, using my fine tip. And then going back over again with the lighter colour. Actually, I'll use the brush end and just going over that just to blend that out. I'm really loving this hand-penned stamp set. I just think it is just so beautiful and soft. Okay, so we've got 2 flowers there. Then I'm going to do this one down here, just to keep it balanced. I don't need much of the dark. If I don't see your comments, I will get back to them afterwards. Now, Vicky, I think you won my card from last week, and I still haven't got your address, so I can send it to you. So if you could message me with your address, I would really love to send one of my cards to you. It'd be great. So that's all of that one. Make sure when you put your lids on your blender pens that you hear that click, because they will dry out if you haven't put your lids on properly. So the next colour we're going to be using is our So Saffron. And again, starting with my light colour. Now, these are just for these tiny, weeny little flowers. I'm not going to worry so much about them as far as my edges are concerned. I might, if I feel that I have to go back and go over it just to soften the edges, I will. But It's a fairly light colour anyway. And really, I don't think the dark is actually much darker than my light. In this one, you can't really see that much of a difference in colour, but is there, and we're just adding that, just that little bit of highlight. And as you can see, I'm not actually going back over it because I'm really just keeping it fairly soft anyway. And we're just gonna okay, so that's that one. Now we've got one colour left, and that is our mint macaron. And we're just going to start again with using our brush nib. And all I'm just going to do again is just doing that flicking. I'm just not quite taking it all the way to the edge. And I'm using the center of my leaf, that line, as where I'm flicking from. So I'm just going to work over. I'm not quite going out to that outer edge. And then I'm going to come back with my dark one, and I'm going to use the highlighting that the Stampin' Up have given us as my area of highlight for my colour, my darker colour. I'm really only just using that as my guide. So and again, if you wanted to, you could come back in with that lifter and just soften some of those edges. Pushing that colour in. I find sometimes doing this sort of work with my blends, I tend to get very, I enjoy it, and I get very just sort of deep in just not thinking, just colouring. It's just something I really enjoy. Might just put a little bit more. I'm not quite sure whether I actually went into that one, but there we go. So we're almost done. We've just got a few more leaves to go. And this, just by doing a flicking, is actually, it's quite a quick way of colouring, because it's not, you don't have to be as precise. Just soften up some of these little edges. And that's it. That's all our colouring done. So that was quite simple. I hope you've enjoyed watching that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the die that gives us that beautiful scalloped edge. So I'm just going to lay this across here. Now I do have some tape here. You could use a washi tape, or this is a post-it note tape that you can pick up from the Officeworks, and I find this is quite handy, and I can just stick that down. So I've got my cut and emboss over here to the side, and I'm just going to pop that onto, so what I've got here is I've got plate 1, plate 2 and my 2 plate 3s. Make sure I'm happy with where that is positioned, and put my other plate 3 on top and run that through my cut and emboss. Take that off. Just very carefully. There we go. Remove that piece, and there's our beautiful edge on that piece of cardstock. So now what we need to do is we're going to bring in the rest of our pieces here, and we're going to just going to take all these blends out of the road, so we've put them over to one side, and we're going to emboss our sentiment. Now I've decided to maybe try a thinner sentiment. Normally I probably wouldn't use a sentiment or use a strip of basic blacks that's so wide. Sometimes I think they can get a little bit too wide because it is a very bold colour against card. Because it's the complete opposite to your white. So I thought what we might try to do is use one of the other sentiments from this stamp set, and this one just says congratulations, but it's a lot narrower. So we're just going to place this on our block. Now I've got a fairly big piece of cardstock here, and I am going to use my embossing buddy. I might use that on that side if that's cleaner, and I'm just going to pop some of that. Now the embossing buddy is really great just to stop the static and the grease from our fingers from attracting the embossing powder. So I'm using here the Versamark ink, which is just like a little bit like a glue that's going to adhere to our embossing powder. I'll stamp that down. Can't see that for the moment, but we're going to emboss this in white. And so what I'm going to do, I've got to need a scrap of paper there. I'm going to pop our little bit of powder on top of that. Just flick away some of that excess. That looks great. Might just actually put a little bit more. Let's see at the end. And then using a heat gun, we can heat this. So let me just pop the lid onto that so we don't get powder going everywhere and powder melting everywhere. And now this is going to get a little bit noisy. Just warming the heat gun up. And we're just going to heat emboss our congratulations. And you'll notice when it's done, it goes from a matte to quite a shiny white, or a dull white to a shiny white, or bright white. And that's when you know that that has all done. Just give that centerpiece a little bit more of a, that's looking great. Just got to be very careful that you don't overheat your embossing powder because you can burn it, and just watch your cardstock because it can tend to curl a little bit with the heat. Now I am going to use my favourite little trimmer here just to trim this down. So I'm just going to slip that into there. So I'm going to turn it the opposite way so I can see where I'm measuring. Now I'd like to try to get my wording nice and straight, so let's see how we go. Oops, slip that out. Now I want to make that a lot finer than that. Now there's a little trick to doing this, and you need actually a post-it note. And we're going to make like a handle, because I want to actually trim that down just to a few millimeters either side. So I'm just going to stick my post-it note onto one side and then use that as a handle to be able to move this around. I think luckily I have stamped this reasonably straight. And what I'm doing, I don't know whether you can see, you probably can't, but I'm actually lining up the top of my words with the top of the curve of the guide here that you can hold on to. And I'm also judging a little bit to whether how much I've got top and bottom. Let's see how we go. So that's beautiful that way. So now we're going to turn it and stick my handle on the other side and do the same again. Because this adhesive is actually wider than my words, I'm actually going to stick it down there a little bit because it's catching on here. I don't mind if I cut a bit of that away, because what I want to try to do is, again, just lining up those words with the edge of this plastic plate here. I've also got a screw here. I've like a Phillips head screw at one end and a Phillips head screw at the other end, and I can see at the moment that my edge of my basic black is in line with the line on the Phillips head, and the same with this one here. Don't go, I'm like lining up with the center of it, because you can't guarantee that Phillips head's in this, both of them in the same direction. But I'm fairly positive I've got that right. Yes, I'm happy with that. So I just want a really fine little piece. I can remove all of that, pop those away in my bin under the table. I don't do it now, I won't do it later on, and that's how I end up in such a big mess. And there's my lovely little sentiment saying just congratulations. So now we're going to put our card together. So we've done our colouring, we've done our die cutting, we've done our sentiment, and I've already pre-embossed my mat. So we're going to take our card base and fold that in half, and I've scored this at the 14.9. So I just want to make sure everything is all lined up there, and just using my bone folder, just making sure I've got a nice firm crease at the top of my card. Now I do like to use my multi-purpose glue when I'm adhering all this together, because it just gives me that little bit of slip to make sure that I'm getting everything in place. So I'm just going to pop some multi-purpose glue onto my card, back of my mat. Don't want to use too much, and you don't want to go too close to the edge, because otherwise you may find that you'll have a bit of glue oozing, and we don't want that really. By using the multi-purpose glue, it gives us a few seconds that we can actually lay this down and then move it to where we're happy with it sitting. And I'm just going to rub that just to make sure that all that glue is nice and even, and I'm not left with any globs underneath there. Yes, that's looking great. Now I'm also going to, you could put this up on dimensionals, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually use just a bit of glue. I'm just checking at the moment to see if I've got, because I do want a bit of space, and I might just trim this just a little bit. So I'm just going to take my trimmer and I'm just going to trim just a couple of mil off one end there. So I just want a little bit more space around my mat. So I don't know whether you can see, but I've actually got my mat poking out at all three sides here. So this is sitting about 1.5 mils on the inside to 2 mils on the inside of my mat, and I'm just going to use multi-purpose glue. Pop that onto the back there. Make sure I always put my lid on very quickly because otherwise the nib will clog up and dry. Move that into position. Just like that. Yep, I'm happy with that. Now we've got our sentiment here, which is quite small. And what I want to do is have my sentiment going that way. So I'm going to use my trimmer again. So I'm popping my sentiment more across the edge. Now I'm taking my sentiment from the width of the mat, which is 10 centimeters. So I'm going to cut my sentiment because I want it more this way than that way. So I've just trimmed a piece off about 1 centimeter from the last letter. Line this up at 10 centimeters and trim. And this is where our mini dimensionals are going to come in handy. Hopefully I haven't trimmed it down so narrow that the dimensionals won't fit. Otherwise I'll be cutting these in half. So we're going to pop probably quite a few on here. It's only just going to fit in there. Just using my tweezers just to position these. You could also use your take a pick tool and just use the pointy end because it's and peel the backings off. As I said, I'm just taking this from the end of the mat. Line it up there just to see it's a little bit crooked, so I haven't pushed that down firm as yet, I hope. Okay, pop those down, just give that a little bit of a push to make sure that that's there. Let's remove all of this and bring my other card in. So there's the card I made last night, and there's my other one. So same sort of same colouring and everything, just by adding a different sentiment and a different width in your basic black really changes the look of the card. So thank you for joining me today and watching. If I didn't see your comment, I will get back to you. But I hope to see you again next week, Friday at 1 o'clock. So I hope you can join me then. Bye for now.